just kind of jump right in. For those who are not aware, this is the Brie Myself and God channel. You're watching this on IG, but if you catch it on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. I'm bringing all things Brie and all things God. And kind of a reason why I really wanted to do this content, especially around Black History Month, is because I've had my YouTube channel going now for like a year and a half or something like that. And I've covered a lot of different topics. And I've covered race and justice a little bit, but the way that race and justice colors my view of the world and the way that I interact with God and the way that I go through life, it's such a big part of my life that I just feel like it's really important for me to put out more content that really reflects that. The title of today's live is We Met God, He's Pro-Black. And the reason that it's titled that way is because Natalie and I both have thriving relationships with our Creator, with our Savior. And in our process of knowing God and also walking through this world as Black women who are passionate about justice, it has become evidently clear to us not only that God is pro-Black, but that he is being maligned and slandered as though he were not. There are people out there who are pushing narratives that would make us think that God, Christianity, is not passionate about justice, doesn't care about Black people and the things that we go through. And that is just a lie, and it's a lie that is so violent. But before I jump into it, because I can really start to go, I just want to introduce Natalie. I want to let her introduce herself. And I think that maybe you could just tell them a little bit about who you are and why this topic is important to you.
Yeah. So my name is Natalie, and I've honestly had a heart for justice since I was a little girl. I was that person who I would go home, like if I saw someone being bullied, I would be the one who's like, y'all chill. Yeah. I would be the one, if there was a person in the class nobody would talk to, I would go make friends with them. Mm-hmm. So my heart has always been sensitive to people who the majority outcast. Mm. And so that's always been something that's been on my heart. Mm. And I started getting, I guess, hip to like race. I mean, all Black children growing up, you have some notion of race. Yeah, especially sure. as Black children who society tags as gifted, constantly in gifted spaces, which are predominantly white. You really do learn at a young age about, okay, I'm different from everyone else, and people treat me differently because of that. I remember thinking as a kid, whenever I would ask questions or be inquisitive, oh, you're so articulate. Oh,
girl, don't get me started.
And I would feel like, I mean, they just asked the question, why didn't you say that to them?
Okay. So maybe like Brianna, your vocabulary. I mean, I had a great vocabulary, don't get me wrong, but I feel you.
Yes. And so I've always like noticed that. And so I always kind of had that curiosity, and I'm blessed that I had parents who kind of fed that curiosity. I remember one of my favorite Christmas gifts was this huge it was like a dictionary size, but it was about Black history, and specifically it was Black history in the church. So I've always grown up with this deep understanding about race, about my positioning, and also races, like our race and how African Americans are treated, and how God cares about that, and how God has a passion for justice, just like he has a passion for so many other things. And so just growing up, that's always been on my heart. As I went through high school and experienced as I went through my entire life and experienced racist interactions, especially in high school, I remember being a part of a small private school, and that at that school they were talking about like the monkeys in South Jackson and hanging monkeys from the trees, and just very blatantly racist things. And that kind of transitioned a curiosity into like oh no, like we're not about to do this. And it kind of transitioned to a passion for these issues to engage and take action in. And that just translated through undergrad, where I had a lot of opportunities to organize, do community organizing, to protests, to do policy issues, initiatives. And so that's kind of like my journey to engaging with these issues. And to this day, I mean, I'm in law school now. I care about these issues. I'm taking a class right now called Civil Rights Actions. So like, I definitely have a deep tie to justice, to social justice. And I really see it through a lens of God cares about that society doesn't care.
Yeah. And like a lot of what you said resonates with me. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, but my family moved to the suburbs when I was relatively young. And going from being around all Black people to being the only Black girl in my class, I definitely experienced my fair share of racism and had definitely grew into caring about like what my identity as a Black woman. And I think that for me, college was also a game changer, and I learned about injustice and systemic injustice at a whole nother level. And at the same time that I was growing in my understanding of injustice, I was also growing in my relationship with God. And those two things coalesced in a really powerful way for me that have shaped how I view the world and how I view God. And so I think that it's one thing to talk about why these topics are important to me and you personally. Why is it important for us to talk about this like in this type of a setting? Because you and I just have spent, 3 hours in the last couple of weeks on the phone talking about it amongst ourselves. But why does it matter to the point where we need to be having a conversation, in this type of a sphere about it? Like, why is that important?
I mean, I think what's been going on this year and just for years in America, that in and of itself speaks to the need for us to have these conversations and engage in this discourse. I think the social relevance is pretty clear, but if not, I'll lay it out. Like, we have Black men, women, and children being killed systemically by police officers, by medical institutions. We have systemic deprivation of opportunities and economic opportunities, as far as wealth building opportunities, as far as job opportunities. Like, this is something that is ongoing and impacting the Black community disproportionately. And so from the social sphere, that matters, right? But if we're talking about how it intersects with our faith, I mean, God is a God of justice. God is a God of justice. When he describes himself as God, he includes his passion for justice. He includes his passion for making sure that people are treated fairly, because we are all image bearers. We are all image bearers of Christ. And so therefore, he cares when we do things that affront and attack disproportionately image bearers, right? And so if you're talking about from a Christian worldview, you cannot call yourself a Christian, a Christ follower, someone who pursues after our Creator, and not care about justice and not care about systems that disproportionately treat image bearers differently.
Yeah, no, that's so real. And if I could add to that, why I'm passionate about covering this topic too, is because I think that the violent, like the false views about God and justice and where God stands on justice, to me, it is such a deep act of violence to misconstrue God in this area, because what it does is two things. One, it alienates Black people from our freaking Creator. Like, what? You mean to tell me that God made me, and you want to feed me narratives that make me think that God doesn't care about the way that I walk through this world?
Yeah.
You want to make me believe that the God who made me and the God who died for me doesn't care about how I experience life as a Black person? That alienates people from God in a way that I think is so deeply saddening. And it's like, as someone who is very much in social justice spaces, it's sad to me to see the way that religion is so stigmatized in those spaces, but rightfully so. I'm not saying it's an criticism, but it's like, it's because and we'll talk about how we got here, but it's because it's been manipulated, it's because it's been misconstrued. And as a result of that, people who care about justice in some ways have been alienated from relationship with God, because of the way that religion has been, God has been misrepresented in religion. And that is violence, because God is the best thing that has ever happened to me. And so it grinds my gears, and grinds my gears isn't even a sufficient term to say how much it pains me to think that people are alienated from God because of false teachings, false views about where he stands on issues of justice, and bad, just ineffective representations of God. And then the second reason I think it's so important to talk about why God is pro-Black and is for justice is because the belief that he isn't enables the perpetuation of injustice. So, we're a so-called, Christian nation, which, like, I know there's separation of church and state, but we're a majority Christian nation. How Sway is a majority Christian nation? If we think about what Christ actually stood for, how is that type of a nation treating Black people, treating poor people the way that we are? It's because people believe that there is no conflict between their religion and the way they view God and mistreating and oppressing Black people and ignoring our struggles, ignoring our pain. And that's all marginalized groups. People have somehow come to a conception of God that allows them to tolerate and even perpetuate the most grotesque and violence injustice that this country is responsible for. And it just, I could start swinging. I don't even know who I would be swinging at right now. Like, but it makes me so upset. And so I guess one question that I would want to ask is like, how did we even get here? How did we get to this place where there's this association between God, Christianity, religion, and racism and white supremacy and all these different things that you and I agree do not actually reflect God?
Oh, so I mean, I'm not a historian, but as someone who's passionate about this, I have done some research, and from my understanding, it dates back to, if you think about our forefathers, America's forefathers, they were Christian men, but the Christianity at this time and their idea of God was that God was this entity that was separate from the ongoings of the world. That he didn't have, God is this person up there, and the society is kind of like these cogs and clockwork that just goes on, and God's hand is just not in it. And he lets things go as they do. And, you know, the Bible gives us morals to live by and behaviors, and it guides our morality and our ideas of what's right and wrong. But as far as God's action in our lives, he is this separate person. And so as you go on and you have this idea that God is somehow separate from our lives, and you have these white men who are aligned with white supremacy and care and have a deep vested interest in perpetuating systems that place them in positions of power, you can see how it's an easy transition to say God is separate. He doesn't care about what we do. And as long as we don't do certain things, we are empowered to continue to do these types of things. And so when you have white supremacy as something that motivates people, what happens is, as time goes on and as slaves are brought in and as, you know, slavery is perpetuated, you have white people who are in positions of power, who have a vested interest in perpetuating those systems of power, interpreting the Bible because they are in positions of power, right? And so you have this and there's another like underlying history in Christianity that's still perpetuated to this day, that only certain people can hear from God and speak on behalf of the Bible, right? And so you have that undertoning everything. And so you have this idea that God is separate. You have this another idea that only certain people have access to God and can speak on God's behalf. And so you have these white men who are in positions of power who are now speaking on behalf of God, who aren't in relationship with God. They literally aren't in relationship with God, because again, God is a separate thing. He doesn't care about what's going on here. So there's no connection, right? So you have people who are allowing evil in the culture of the time and their own vested interest to interpret the Bible. And that's where we have a lot of issues with our theology, right? And so we have a history of white men who have vested interest in maintaining positions of power, both in their maleness and both in their whiteness. Interpreting the Bible and laying foundations of theology.
And laying the foundations of our society at the same time.
Exactly. And so now we are in this era where we're having to really think critically about the perspectives and frameworks in which we read the Bible. Because for the longest time, we have only been reading the Bible in alignment and in mimicking of these white men who told us this is what the Bible says. And so that's why you have, like, during slavery, pastors interpreting the Bible to justify slavery. They are picking and choosing which passages and interpretations to push forward. And unfortunately, because we are part of a society that we think only certain people can hear from God, we believe those as that's what God believes. And God, no, if you read the Bible, God is very clear. Very clear. Like, he wants you to go after those that society doesn't care about. Like, it's so excruciatingly clear when you read the Bible for yourself. But we are at this era in history where we're having to undo all that. And that's kind of where we've come from to arrive to where we are today.
Yes, way to break that down. Yeah, I agree. And people said the Bible being used to justify slavery. And I think that this is one of the most common misconceptions, because some people's issue is like, oh, the Bible justifies slavery. But it's like the Bible was manipulated to justify slavery. And it's like, oh, somebody just said this. This is so important.
Yeah.
Scripture taken out of context.
Yes.
Like, so the reason people even think that it justifies slavery is because of certain scriptures that if you really look at the context in which those scriptures were written, they were not talking about American chattel slavery.
At all.
There were situations where people could sell themselves into servitude in order to pay off debt, but they were not treated the way, and they were not conceived of the same way that slaves were treated in America. That was something totally different. You know what I mean? And so, you know, it was being used to justify it when that's not necessarily what it was communicating. And, you know, the same way that race was invented to justify slavery, white supremacist theology was also invented in the same way. So you got these white people who want to enslave and oppress Black people. So they literally come up with this ideology around race to justify it. And the same thing is true. They already had, they didn't read the Bible and say, it looks like the Bible is instructing us to get some slaves and, you know, make some money. Like, no, they were like, we want to make this money. We want to oppress these people. Let's look for where we can find a way to justify it, you know? And so I'm curious for you, what are some ways that you see, like, what has been your journey of seeing the Bible through a lens that is different from that kind of original, kind of white male kind of viewpoint? I know you said you were kind of raised with some things about justice, but has it been for you a process at all of learning to see that more deeply or more clearly?
Oh yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like my journey started with this deep part of me that I've always cared about justice, right? And I truly believe that, you know, it's part of my purpose. And so I believe that God wouldn't call me to something that he doesn't care about, right? He's not going to place us in positions to advocate for something that's not in line with his plan, right? For the world, for us. And it's going to be consistent with his heart and his word in the Bible. Yeah. And so growing up, my passion for these issues I was oftentimes the only one in Black and white circles, you know, caring about these issues and saying, no, this is wrong. This is, you know, this is an injustice. God cares about this. And I would be confronted with things like, you know, you're a Christian first. You're a Christian. Your identity is in Christ. So it's wrong for you to identify as a Black woman. What? Like, what? God created me as a Black woman. So I think, you know, when we talk about walking our identity in Christ, our identity is also who he created us to be, right? And he created me to be a Black woman. So
I love to say I'm fearfully and wonderfully made Black. Okay.
Exactly. So, and with that realization and experiencing so many instances of racism and being persecuted because I am a Black woman, you know, it made me search the Bible and do some deeper studies that I think people who are protected in their whiteness or protected in their privilege don't have to. They just don't have to, because they don't have to think about their position. They don't have to think about their identity and how people view them. And so because of those experiences, it made me do a lot of research in the Bible. It made me go into the Bible and say, okay, Lord, I literally did a study of justice. And I like typed it up and I said, okay, every time justice is mentioned, I'm going to go read it. I'm going to take notes. And I'm going to do a deep dive. And doing that deep dive made me realize, like, whoa, God really cares about justice.
He really cares.
I'm a God of justice. I care about those who are oppressed. Do not treat people wrong. When you're in the courts, do not have unequal balancing of the scales. Like, he literally says it so many times, and we're not taught that. We're not taught that because, again, our theology is rooted. And when you really think about slavery and who introduced African Americans to Christianity, it is white people and white men particularly. And so the way we teach and think and deconstruct and conceptualize the Bible is rooted in that. And the sad thing, kind of going back to what you were talking about earlier, is a lot of people are realizing that and they're going away. They're saying Christianity is a white man's religion. It's like, no, know your history. Christianity is a Middle Eastern religion, if you really
Right.
want to get into it. It's a Middle Eastern religion.
Yeah.
And so brown people, Black and brown people, Christianity is a religion that was started by Black and brown people. So don't get it twisted. It's not a white man's religion, as a lot of things they went ahead and colonized it.
Yeah.
But it is not in and of itself a white man's religion.
Wow.
And so that's one of the saddest things that has happened, is that we've allowed the colonization of Christianity to happen. And so now we're in this age where, you know, a lot of people like you and me are like, God's hard for justice and really challenging. And it's not just with race. I did a deep dive of like how the Bible thinks about women, because oftentimes we are left out of the narrative when we're talking about Christianity and pillars of the faith. And so, you know, that all that to say is that as far as how I got here, it's just my identity. Like, who I am as a Black woman has propelled me to do research and really do a deep dive in these issues and say, okay, what does God really say? Because I feel like they're not having an accurate reflection of what God cares about.
Okay, yes to all of that. Man, okay, there's like 3 different things you said. One, there's this one quote that I love that says, if you believe Christianity is a white man's religion, you've bought the white man's narrative. And that's why I'm so passionate, because we cannot let white supremacy win and convince us that we don't have a claim in this, that we don't have a stake in a relationship with God, that God is, it's like, I'm sorry, but like white people have like basically almost like painted God in their own image. Like, we're supposed to be made in God's image, but it's like they, you know, and specifically white racist people, not all white people, you know, whatever, like, have developed a theology around whiteness. And like, they don't even realize it's around whiteness. And so we're being accused of worshiping our Blackness because we have a pro-Black theology, because that is theology. Yeah. But I'm like, if you want to worship whiteness, just say that. And don't put God in it. Just go worship whiteness. Don't try to make...
Don't put my Savior's name on that.
Okay? Jesus was not white. He was not white. He was not white. like the people. Anyway, so just everything said about that, and what you said about the process of searching out the scriptures being the thing that helped you to see it differently, that was definitely key for me too. Because when I was in college and I'm learning about injustice, that's when I started searching the scriptures more for justice. I don't think I was searching it as a child. I think as a child, I was perfectly content to just be taught about God and in a more general sense. You know what I mean? And it's not that I grew up in a Black church, but it wasn't like a pro-Black church. You know what I mean? Like, it was a Black church. We had our gospel music. We had our culture. We had our raps. We had our, you know, whatever. It was great. But I wasn't learning. I wasn't being taught about God and justice. I was being taught, don't sleep with the boys. And I was being taught, you know, I'll never throw shade on the way that the scriptural foundation I was given at my church. It was wonderful, but I do think it missed this. And I think that comes down from leadership, because my friend Shelly just commented a few minutes ago that her aunt believes, you know, we're Christian first and our identity as Black people is not supposed to be as important. And I literally went to a church service, you know, at my home church after kind of going away to college and getting more woke. And I heard the person in leadership of my church say, like, Black power is silly, like, because how are you going to be proud of your skin color? This is just a suit that we're in. This is not who we are, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, how you going to be? I'm like, I could have got up and walked out. Like, I could have got up and walked out. I said, people died to like defend and proclaim the dignity of Black people. The reason that Black power and Black identity is so important is because Black people are made in the image of God. And like, and racism denies that. It is an affront to a sacred truth about humanity, every color of humanity. And you mean to tell me it's not important for me to be proud of myself as a Black woman that God made me to be? Yeah. What? Yeah. And it's just like you said, it's also tied up with purpose, right? So like for me, in the process of learning so much more about justice in college, that was when I did start researching more, not even researching, just reading the Bible more for myself. And I used to grow up, I didn't really read the Old Testament like that, but like in college, I was just doing more Bible reading. I started a Bible in a year plan my sophomore year of college. I'm sad to say I still haven't finished it. I have about 82 days left because I still haven't gotten through the Old Testament. But even reading the Old Testament and seeing how God spoke to Israel, the reason why I love the way that God talks about justice in the Old Testament is because it shows how God speaks to a society. And because Israel, you know, God's people in the Old Testament was the Jewish nation. So this is how God spoke to a nation. So, you know, a lot of times I think that our theology is so individualistic, and we think God is only speaking to our personal piety, our personal, are you doing right? But when God spoke to Israel, he spoke to them as a collective, and he said, I don't want your fast. This is, you're fasting and you're doing all these feasts and all these religious things that were the things that God told them to do, but they had an unjust society. And at every turn, if you go through the Old Testament, God is calling them out. And he's like, this is the fast that I have chosen to you, to break the chains of the oppressed.
Right.
Like, I've chosen a fast for you to, he said, plead the cause of the widows and the orphans. You know what widows are? That doesn't ring a bell to us because it doesn't have the same resonance in our society, but that widows were unprotected women. Women. He's constantly telling them, do right by women. Y'all are not doing right by women. Orphans. And when I see widows and orphans in scripture, I'm thinking about Black people, because, you know, it's like W.E.B. Du Bois said, how have you made me a stranger in my own house? Mm-hmm. And I feel like Black people in America, we are like an orphan child, because this is supposed to be like our home, but it's like we're made to not even be at home in our own home. I mean, it's not really supposed to be our home because we were kidnapped and brought here, but now that we're here, this is my house, and you're making me out to be a stranger in my own house. Yeah. And it's just like, there are so many, he always said, don't do wrong by the poor. You know, he always said, like you said, don't have unequal justice for the rich and the poor. I work in an organization that fights against money bail. How are Christians okay with the idea that whether you sit in jail depends on how much money you have? That is unequal justice. That is an abomination. But the abomination is injustice to the poor. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and all these different things. And so definitely searching out scriptures was a whole process for me of like really realizing that too. And so that's how it's shown in the Old Testament. It's like how God speaks to Israel. And so it's like God cares about society. This idea, like you said, the white men who were the founding fathers, who tried to make us think that God was up there and we were down here and that he didn't care what we did. That is not biblical. You and I talk about it, it's just not biblical. And the idea that God only cares about individuals is again an imposition of our culture, our individualistic culture. And somebody a minister who was over a campus ministry that I was in undergrad, me and him were DMing about this, and he said that westernized individualistic lens also affects how we think about justice, because we think God is only concerned with us as individuals, but not as people groups. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, that's real. That is real.
And it's like, you mean to tell me that you think that God cares about you as an individual, but not Black people as a group? If he cares about individuals, he cares about groups. If he cares about women individually, then he has to, as a God who has a bird's eye view, be able to zoom out and care about the things that women are experiencing collectively. If he cares about Black people individually, he obviously, as God, can zoom out and say, I don't just care that this one Black person was shot by a police officer and this one individual Black person, but I care about the fact that systematically Black people are being shot by police. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, and it's like this colorblind gospel. I don't know if you've ever had, I've been talking a lot, so let me let you, do you have any experience with kind of like the idea that the gospel is supposed to be colorblind, and any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, that's a great example of white people in positions of power, specifically within Christianity, taking their worldview and placing it on top of the Bible rather than letting the Bible speak for itself. And so this idea of God being colorblind and we all precious in his sight. Yeah, we all precious in his sight. But why would God create diversity if he didn't care about it? Mm-hmm. If he was a colorblind God in all of his knowledge and wisdom and infiniteness, why didn't he make all look the same? Because God takes pleasure in our individuality. He takes pleasure in crafting us and allowing us to have identity in him. Yeah. And so I think this idea that we can erase that is just biblical. Like God is God, and he knows what he is doing, and we are not. And so I think to this idea that we can kind of like retcon the Bible into creating this type of safety for us to be comfortable with where we are. And that's not just with race, that's in a lot of things. We like to retcon. When I say retcon, you know, whenever you go in to what writers do, they go back and they like try to fix their previous storylines, right? So the fact that we're trying to retcon the Bible to make us feel comfortable with whatever our worldview and perspectives are, it's just not biblical. The Bible speaks for itself. And so this idea that God doesn't see color is stupid. He created color. He created color. Like, come on now. Like, it's just, it's very inconsistent. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that. Like, God celebrates that. God created a bajillion different animals that look different with different colors, and because he cares about that. And what you were saying earlier about, you know, if God cares about the individual, he cares about the group. I mean, that's so true. But also, like, let's just go to the Bible. He talks about groups. He says, be kind to the foreigners. He doesn't say be kind
to everybody.
No, he to everybody, but he doesn't say, he doesn't pick out a particular person. He doesn't say be kind to, I'm trying to think of a random Israelite name, Benjamin. Like, he's not saying be kind to Benjamin, or he be kind to Haggai, or whatever. He says be kind to foreigners. So that goes, that verb, it says that God thinks in groups. He says this entire group you need to do right by. Widows, he doesn't pick a particular widow. He doesn't say, oh, this particular person, be kind to them. He says widows. If they fall into this group that is marginalized systematically by your culture, do right by them. Because that's the fact of the matter. Like, widows, orphans, lepers, foreigners, there were all groups that were marginalized at the time. So we have to understand the culture of the time of the Bible. Like, those were groups society didn't care about. They literally casted, if you were a leper, they literally casted you from the community. You were away. You had to stay away. No one touched you. No one, you were isolated. So whenever Jesus went and healed lepers, and whenever he went out and he went with tax collectors and widows and orphans and prostitutes or sex workers, like, that was those were the people that society hated. He cared about them, and he instructs us to care about them. And that being translated to today, Black, brown people, religious minorities, LGBTQ people that this society says we don't like, we want to isolate, these are minorities, we don't care about them because of X, Y, and Z. Those are the exact groups as Christians have a duty as reflections of Christ and reflections of God in the earth to pursue after and to
because you went a step ahead of me, and this is perfect, because I was gonna next be like, we should bring this to the New Testament context, right? Because we were talking a lot about God in the Old Testament, be kind to the widows and orphans, be kind to the foreigners. But I wanted to be like, and if you for some reason don't have Old Testament literacy and you needed a more tangible example, let's look at Jesus.